So, blockchain gaming reimagined, the past, the present, and the future. In this presentation, I'll try to explain as best I can the situation in gaming with connection to the blockchain. What are the past errors and what are the possibilities for the future of in this field? So let's kick off. So first of all, look, regardless whether you're gaming native or crypto native, it's quite known that both of those communities are quite skeptical about crypto gaming nowadays, which is a shame. And I want to, because there are possible, of course, there are reasons for it. I won't lie, and I'll try to explain those reasons and again explain how this can be used as technology that empowers creators instead of just try to bring players for the wrong reasons. So try to approach this with a clear head. First of all, let's start by the explanation of what blockchain is and how it works. And I'll do this very briefly. So the first application that you probably know of blockchain technology called blockchain is of course Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency. And technologically, blockchain is just, you can think of it as a database. It consists of blocks, and each block that are being added to the blockchain contains new data. So for example, in case of Bitcoin, about new transactions that are done on the blockchain. And so that from that you can derive the balances of each address, each account. And the idea is that you're allowed to do certain actions only if you own the private key, which is a key to you could think of it as a password to your to your address, and only by having that key you can sign transactions. So in principle, no one else can, if you don't share the password, no one else can have those funds. And that's the only thing that you actually need in order to understand and generally submit transactions to the blockchain. So transactions are only added, new blocks are added one after the other, and each block contains transaction, and each block depends on previous blocks with its computations. And of course, it's not stored on any one particular device. It's a decentralized network and it's stored on many nodes across the internet. And there are algorithms in place that allows those nodes to synchronize because there's no like primary node or parent node. These all are nodes that are connected to one another and they're negotiating the current state of the blockchain, meaning that it's decentralized. And you can think of it as an immutable database that you cannot hack, and database that it's immutable in a sense you can only add stuff to it and you can read from it. You cannot take stuff, you cannot delete stuff from it. And then came Ethereum, which is another blockchain, another technology, which introduced this idea of smart contracts. And yeah, so what are smart contracts? Smart contracts are they're sort of similar to regular contracts. They're contracts that are stored on the blockchain. They're programs that are stored on the blockchain and can be executed in a decentralized manner by users or whatever is written into them. So again, to sum up the idea of the blockchain, first of all, it is decentralized. It's a decentralized database that no single entity can control. And of course, from the user perspective, it's very flexible in terms of smart contracts. So programs that are just like regular contracts that are executed by computers instead of people. And yeah, everything on the blockchain is public in a sense that you can view every transaction that has ever been done, and you can review it and you can see who's the author in terms of their addresses. So in that case, it's transparent, but the data is not bound to any particular user. So in that case, in that sense, it's private. And everybody, of course, everybody's playing by the same rules. So if you have smart contracts that allow certain people, only certain people, to do certain things, and you can do just that. I've mentioned that previously in case of Bitcoin, it's secure and it's immutable. Immutability in case of blockchain means that you cannot take stuff out of it. It's provided by the algorithms that run it that stuff can only be put in and new transactions can only be put in, and that also applies to smart contracts in case of Ethereum and other Ethereum blockchains, that you can call functions that are parts of smart contracts, of course, according to the rules that are written in the code, but you cannot cancel that call, you cannot take it out. And in principle, it also removes conflicts of interest. And the conflict of interest is written in most agreements, like regular agreements under some law that we sign every day. Like, for example, an agreement about insurance, and there is a conflict of interest in terms of if you, for example, buy an insurance and then something happens that you get insured for, like let's say you're insured for of like bad weather on your vacation. And then it's in the best interest of the party that's insuring you, that's issuing the insurance, to not pay you no matter what, because it's their money, of course. And yeah, so you have execution of agreements and then lawyers that need to run it and so on. And in principle, in terms of smart contracts and blockchain, those agreements are run by computers, by math and by programs. So everything in principle, again, everything that's written in the contract sort of becomes mm, the law, and yeah, it gets executed automatically, and there's no conflict of interest for computers. And in that way, it's also trustless because, again, in principle, you as a user of some smart contract, or like let's say an insurance smart contract, you do not have to trust the brand that they will follow the agreement. You can in principle review the code yourself or see what's actually written in the smart contract and decide whether you're going to join or not based on that. And with all that came, of course, many things that can be expressed as smart contracts, like, for example, tokens and a lot of cryptocurrencies that are now on the Ethereum blockchain, and also NFTs, which you probably have heard of. Those are, for example, Bored Apes, which is a ridiculously expensive collection of NFTs. And yeah, NFTs and all that stuff is, and why they are so expensive, and why do people want them? Why do they keep getting more and more expensive? It's all a subject for another topic and another video, and we won't cover that. However, uh, some people in the process thought that it's a perfect application for gaming because we have in-game currencies, and so we can reward players because it's free money that we can print out, like for example tokens or NFTs, and then people will be able to sell them, but only if someone's willing to buy them. And so came games like, and this term play to earn has been coined, which basically means that if you play my game, you are going to earn money. Because instead of rewarding you with points, I'm going to reward you with tokens. And then you'll be able to sell those tokens. But maybe nobody thought about the fact that if you want to sell the tokens, then someone needs to have to buy them. So yeah, it's basic laws of supply and demand, of course, which are driving prices on the blockchain as well. Uh, yeah, and of course, games like Axie Infinity, which is the most popular, which used to be the most popular game on the blockchain, and they made a lot of money, and people played this game a lot, buying those monsters as NFTs, and then earning cryptocurrencies and so on. And those were all games that are called play to earn. And yeah, and in a sense, historically, from what the blockchain world and the gaming world has realized that a long time ago, the blockchain world is only realizing this right now, that play to earn games are a failure. And they're a failure because of very simple, very simple like things, because the engagement to the game is very poor. Those games are not targeted towards players because they do not provide, their main goal is not to provide entertainment to players. Their main goal is to provide players with money. Uh, and yeah, they don't meet, most of them don't meet the simple rules of supply and demand. You can print as much tokens as you want, and then nobody wants to buy them. And then those games very quickly fail because you're earning tokens that are not worth anything, and there's no particularly sophisticated gaming around that. So that's the failure of play to earn, and those games feel scammy, and most of them are, admittedly. And admittedly, that's why both the gaming community and the crypto decentralization, like part of the community, so DeFi, they also think that play to earn are a failure and are not worth the attention. However, having said that, why are we even talking about it then? So, blockchain is just a technology. Just a technology in terms of smart contracts are also technology programs. So they can be used to scam people. They can be used to do something meaningful. And there are actually many sorry, there are actually many use cases that can be utilized in gaming and that games can take advantage of in order to actually make better gameplay. But first of all, we need to think, why do we play games? So of course, this is quite simple, and to a game jamming community, I'll go over it quite quickly. So of course, we play games to have fun. We spend our time and we're having fun. But the time is not the only thing that we're spending. We're also spending money, like for buying in-app purchases or purchasing the game, and we also put in our skills. We want to get better at stuff, and then fun is not the only thing that we get out. We also get gratification, which is the game telling us you did a good job, and some people are actually more incentivized by that. And we also get this feeling of excellence, which humans love, which is the feeling of being actually good at something, better at something, and then getting more skill and playing the game even better. And of course, that's an oversimplification of why we're playing games, why we play games, and it of course also depends on the genre, but that's what it is. It's a simplification. So in case of play and earn, on case of blockchain usage, and not only that, we can also get some money from playing games. And when you think about it, it's not really different, very different from other games, not video games, like for example, sports, where some people, not all of them, some people earn money playing sports, and some people earn a lot of money playing esports. And not all of course, not everybody playing like League of Legends earns money by playing it, but some people do. And so play and earn, from what we're going to call them from now, because they are not play to earn. Earning should never be the main incentive of playing. So play and earn games should and can be fun, and we'll try to explore how. So if you look at the history of gaming, of what games have been historically, you can see that each time there was a shift in technology, like new technologies being introduced, you could also find that there were new monetization methods and new ways for players to interact with it, obviously. So we started like with arcade game first, and then consoles and PCs, which moved the entertainment to our homes. And instead of paying each time you played, you ended up paying for the game itself upfront. And this is called premium, of course. And then when mobile came along, of course, games moved to from our homes, they moved to our pockets, and we can now interact with it whenever we want. And that vastly changed, like this whole idea of when you can play, vastly changed the business model of games. And of course, the technology of in-app purchases and being able to show video ads in games also changed that dramatically from the KPIs that game developers follow to the way that games are monetized. And Web3 could be thought as that as well, a new way to monetize games and a new way to incentivize players to play. And of course, we have this model called free to play, which is quite popular nowadays, especially among mobile games. And we're going to talk a little about incentives that designers have when designing games, designing game economy, and designing game loops in general. So, of course, when you're working on a free-to-play game, the first like KPI that you have to focus on, it depends. It admittedly depends on the genre that you're targeting. You're going to have different KPIs if you're doing a hyper casual than to a mid-core game. But in general, you're gonna focus on CPI, which is the cost if you're doing user acquisition, showing ads to players and trying for them to download your game. Then you focus on the CPI, which is cost that you have to pay per install. You're gonna have to focus on retention, which is how many players come back to your game after a certain amount of time. So is the player on average going to launch the game on the next day? What about the other day, the next day, and the next day? And then you have like day one retention, day three, day seven that you measure, and your ARPDAU, which is average revenue per daily active user. You have also variations on that metric, like average revenue per daily active paying user, and so on. And yeah, you of course, in order to meet those KPIs, you do certain things that designers have learned to do over the last 10 or so years of free-to-play being on the market. You end up with in-game stores that people can buy stuff in. You end up with very certain like player paths, player onboarding paths, with mechanics like daily rewards for retaining users and so on. And that's all that designers have figured out in order to be better than others on the market. And can we use blockchain again as a technology, not as a tool to just mint new tokens, but can we use it as a technology to empower that? So let's try with an example. Let's take this sword, which we as developers, let's decide it's a useful tool in our game that players are going to need at certain point, and if we yeah we want to sell it to players as an in-app purchase, or we sell it in game in some way. And let's say we want to put a price tag on it of $10. And in free to play, we usually would sell it as an in-app purchase. And so we put it in our game to an in-game store. And yeah, we are selling on the price for the price that is based on our decision. We create an in-app purchase like on the App Store or Google Play. And we've created an in-app purchase. We decide what's the price. There is a store commission of around 30% usually. And usually the supply is unlimited. We want to spend as many we want to sell as many swords as possible. That's our revenue. And there's no harm in selling too many. Players are, the more players have them, even if it's a multiplayer, we usually don't care. By players, looking from the player's perspective, it's used as money spent. If I get bored with the game, I'm never going to be able to recover that money. So yeah, I cannot get my money back. And on the other hand, if we decide to sell those items as NFTs or give them to players like based on their achievements in game, give them those items as NFTs, which is basically just a record on the blockchain that they own them. It's nothing more. An NFT is nothing more than some piece of stuff put on the blockchain, meaning that you own this. And yeah, we can do that also in games. We can sell stuff as NFTs in games. And later decide whether, like, when players enter the game, we obviously should show their sword because they own it. And it's written on the blockchain that they own it. We can mint as many we want. It's our decision if we're the contract owner of the NFT. So we also can do unlimited supply of those sorts. We can also limit the supply and consider the disadvantages as advantages and advantages of that approach for us as developers. And yeah, only the initial price that we sell for is based on our decision. And later, because it's an NFT, because it comes with all the technology and tooling around it, tooling around blockchain, like for example, websites like OpenSea, players will be able to list them, will be able to sell them. Uh, and it's available by default, and you don't have to, you as a creator of, we as creators of this game, do not have to do any additional stuff in order to make it possible. We can just let players do with their items whatever they want. There is a commission from every resale that year that we as developers are getting for each consecutive resale. So we're incentivized to keep the prices up of those items. So maybe we shouldn't mint as many as possible. Maybe we should keep this particular item rare in order to drive the price up if players are going to need it. And from the pay, yeah, there are gas fees. There are some commissions from, for example, from marketplace. They're not as high as 30% though. Yeah, you would usually limit the supply, of course, depending on your particular game design, depending on the particular use case. But by the players, even if they're going to purchase them. If I'm playing a free-to-play game, I never think of am I going to ever be able to get this money back, because it's viewed as money spent by me as a player. And in case if I would buy an NFT for a game, then there's also the possibility in the back of my head that, hey, if the game keeps the value up, it doesn't have to. It's still a useful thing in the very same meaning of that of the sentence that that an item as an sold as an in-app purchase, it has meaning to me because I want to buy it. And then later, if the game keeps its prices up, then maybe I'll be able to resell it. Maybe I'll be able to resell it at an even higher price. But for me, it's more viewed as a money locking that can be later invested. There is some fee for the developer in it, which is good. Obviously, I want to support the developers as a player. And then later, if I get bored with the game, if I don't like it, I can resell it to other players that are still playing the game. And so, yeah, it could be used in, of course, it could be just that, just selling items instead of as in-app purchases, selling them as NFTs could benefit a lot of games, like for example with skins. And imagine that each NFT, of course, that's a selling point of NFTs. One of them is that each particular NFT is unique. So imagine if like your favorite, sorry for that, like for your favorite esports game, skins would be NFTs, skins for your characters, and then you would be able to purchase like specific skins that were used by some player doing something in the history of a particular game. It sounds like fun thing to do as players, as collectors, as for players that are collectors simply. And so again, coming back to those technologies and business models and incentives for developers, because developers, of course, studios are going to design games based on their mostly financial incentives. How are they going to make money on a particular game? And in arcade games, which are games that are like in bars on arcade machines, the main KPI was the amount of continues. Of course, how it looks, and if a player, a particular player that is seeing my game and the other games that standing next to it, which are they going to choose to play and to spend their money on? And then the main KPI was average number of continues. So if I die, for example, playing Tekken on an arcade machine, then how many times on average am I going to, as a player, throw in another coin and start playing? So that was their main KPI, their main financial goal when creating the game. In case of premium, so games that are sold up front, it was mostly marketability. So how the game looks like in the store compared to the others. The reviews of journalists and media attention, because that's going to drive my revenue up. There's not as much incentive on, for example, retention, or whether players are really gonna continue playing until the end, because of course it incentivizes me as a developer in just making a fun game, but from the financial standpoint, there is really not much difference if players purchase the game and go through half of it and go to the end. In case of free to play, it's much more complicated because we're making money as players play, and we're trying to convert as many players from free players to paid players to premium users, so-called premium players. So our main incentives will be, of course, the ones I've mentioned, like marketability, so the download rate, the CPIs, but also retention from the standpoint of gameplay, and ad revenue and in-app purchase revenue, so that stuff. And if we just move items, if we just move the free-to-play component on the blockchain, and we switch to play and earn, there's the most simple possible use case of the blockchain, just moving items on there. We don't have to. We're not as incentivized to sell as many items as possible. We're more incentivized in making them as useful as possible in the game, so that the prices are kept high and the resale amount of resales, the volume of resales is kept high, because that's our financial incentive to do that. We're getting we're getting a commission from every consecutive resale, some small commission of course, but the more the like of course it scales with the number of players and with number of resales. So we're more incentivized to make items that are really needed by players and that are going to be, because if they're needed, there will be less incentive to sell it, and the price will be kept high because of laws of supply and demand. And of course, we're gonna also be focused the community of the game, and retention is always super important in games that are free to start playing. And that's just owning the items. Smart contracts and blockchain is much more than that. As I've already said, you can write any program as a smart contract and execute that on the blockchain. Some of that you might, some of that you might not want. And yeah, so what Olympics does in this case is all games that are hosted on Olympics, that are done using Olympics, are off-chain. They're not integrated, like games that you're creating in this gem are not blockchain integrated. However, the whole platform, the whole hosting ecosystem is integrated in the blockchain in a way that it's on the blockchain, it's called the Oracle. Oracles basically mean that there's a way to deliver external data to the blockchain. Like in the previous example that I've mentioned, with insurances that are done on the blockchain as smart contracts. How do you know in the smart contract, like in code, how do you know what weather was it if I got insured from bad weather? How does the smart contract know if it was raining in Warsaw, like November 11th, November 12th, 2022? You cannot, it's called the Oracle problem because external data has to be delivered in a secure manner to the blockchain, to smart contracts. The way you do it, it has to, because the blockchain has, you cannot just fetch an external API from the smart contract. You cannot do that because of blockchain like consistency and replayability. You have to be able to compute the blockchain once again at any point in the future. So you cannot simply make a HTTP call from the blockchain, because that service might not be there in a year or so. And that service can return different results based on where you are on the planet. So that's not how you do external data on the blockchain. Again, it's done using the oracles. Oracles are a way to input external data to the blockchain in a secure way, of course, and to keep it there. Like, so for example, in the weather insurance example, the data about the weather that was in Warsaw on November 12th would have been written on the blockchain, and then the smart contract can ask an external oracle, hey, I need the data for the weather for Warsaw for November 12th, 2022. The oracle would put the data there on the blockchain so that it's saved there forever. And then the smart contracts can continue its execution based on the weather data. And so in the same way, Olympics is integrated with the blockchain as a game results oracle. So if you're doing a multiplayer game, for example, players dueling one another, or if you're doing single player game where using Olympics with a player that's in an endless runner and he's scoring some amount of points. Uh, the data of the result of the game is being delivered to the blockchain. It's available to the blockchain as it would have been from an external oracle. And then smart contracts can do whatever they want with that data based on, for example, reward players for winning, or reward players if they scored some particular score threshold, or punish players, like for example, taking some of their assets or destroying some of their assets if the contract is written in that particular way, if they have done really poorly. So again, that's just you can think of smart contracts and the blockchain as an external, like a very secure database that you can write any amount of game economy code on and use it for that instead of using it for meaninglessly rewarding players with artificial money that doesn't make sense. And the gaming examples that we've talked about, it's just from owning the items. And as I said, you can write anything if you have like secure signed game results of the games, of the off-chain games delivered to the blockchain. You can use that to write any game economy. And yeah, so just owning the items, which is in itself an amazing idea, and an amazing evolution of what free-to-play has delivered to the users, to players. But it's just the tip of the iceberg of what you actually can do using the blockchain. Uh, yeah, and what amazes me the most is that we as game development community have been designing virtual economies. That's exactly what we've been doing for the past, I don't know, 10 years, something like that. This is the article from Game Analytics, September 27th, 2013. Game economies, 5 mistakes, and the first one, the mistake zero, is not having a virtual economy in your game. Of course, we all look at free-to-play games a little differently, and we cannot deny their success, at least financial success, some of those games at least. And yeah, they all share the fact that they have stuff we know, that there is an economy in game, that you earn, like for example, gold, and there is another currency which is premium currency that you buy with in-app purchases, and the game gives you very little, and you can get some in-game, but then you run into a wall that you actually need a lot more, and that you can only get through in-app purchases or through viewing ads. That's been something that game designers have been doing for the past 10 years. And virtual economy designers, that's exactly who they are. And I want you to look, instead of blockchain games as being that just an incentive you should come and make money playing the game. Forget about that. Think of the blockchain as a technology that can be used by game designers to do even more cool stuff with way less coding compared to like actually writing that economy in a backend service and hosting it on the AWS. You can do all that and much, much more using smart contracts, and you can authenticate players, and you can, of course, move the assets themselves to the blockchain as tokens, and that's the easiest, like the most obvious solutions. Move NFTs, move the tokens, so the currencies to the blockchain. That's the most obvious use case. There are much more use cases. Uh, but of course, you have to be aware of the technology and its new possibilities that it brings. Like, for example, if you would just move tokens, so gold, from a free-to-play game to the blockchain, it probably wouldn't work because by default players would be available to sell it. And the whole idea of in-game currencies that are currently in free-to-play games, like for those soft currencies like gold in games, the whole idea is that uh, it's uh, it's not worth much in games, so players are by design they're not able to sell it, they're not able to exchange it for much at all. So yeah, it really depends on your particular game that you're creating. And maybe, of course, not every in-game utility makes sense on the blockchain, but there are some that really do, and that could drive your retention up and uh, drive the way you're thinking about designing your game quite differently. And yeah, that's it for my presentation for today. And uh, thank you, unless there are any questions.